Isn't this wonderful? Summer has arrived a little early this year. Well, actually, I'm at the fabulous Chelsea Flower Show, of course. And yes, once it starts, you do know that summer gardening has really begun. There's quite a traditional feel about most of the gardens this year, and they're absolutely packed with plants. I love it. So, I'll be bringing you a quick taste of Chelsea. We also have a report from Vanessa Collingridge on a superb collection of orchids she found in Lancashire, and from Yorkshire, a gardener who made a wonderful garden with a little help from his friends. And I'll be back at Barnsdale making my rockless rocks. But first, Chelsea. It was 40 years ago that I came to my first Chelsea as a mere slip of a lad with a very funny haircut. And I can well remember marvelling then at the skill and the expertise of the craftsmen as they brought their gardens to the point of perfection exactly at the right time. It was astonishing then, and it still amazes me now. But by some people's standards, I am a mere beginner. Dennis O'Brien Baker has been coming here since 1928. That's an incredible 67 years. They're exhibiting Iceland poppies and these lovely verbascums, and they sell the seed. And they are very easy to raise from seed. You sow them outside in the open ground in the summer. By the autumn, they're ready to transplant to their permanent places in the borders, and they'll flower the following year. But do try and give them a bit of good drainage. You know, I wouldn't mind working in an office like this myself. For complete peace and quiet, the office is in a tree house. And as a further heavy hint, there's even a moat around the bottom. Now, the planting in the sunny parts of the garden is in traditional cottage garden style, but in the shady area underneath the tree, it's a different matter. There are lots of plants that will grow in quite deep shade like that, provided they have a moist, retentive soil. So what they've done is to build a dwarf wall around the tree, and then they've filled behind that with soil mixed with lots of organic matter so that it'll hold moisture. And then they've planted in there things like a whole range of ferns, lots of different hostas in different leaf sizes, shapes and colours, and of course flowering plants like the spring flowering pulmonarias and the lovely Solomon's seal. It's a very good example of the fact that whatever conditions you have in the garden, there are always plants to fill them. There's no doubt that it is the horticultural highlight of the year. And the funny thing is that it's teeming with keen gardeners who paradoxically are all looking for ideas to create peace and quiet in their own gardens. Well, last week, Gardener's World went to Yorkshire to visit Charlie Johnson. And he's so keen on gardening that when he moved, he bought the biggest garden he could find.
When visitors come, they are rather surprised that all the land behind these cottages belong to me, and they would have expected some of the houses to have their own. I can't tell you how it all became one, or whether it's ever been split up in the past. I've no idea. But I bought it as it was, and that's it. When I first came here, I decided that I wasn't having any lawns. I don't like grass, and I don't like roses. That was another thing I decided on. And I don't like hedges, particularly privet, where they need pruning every so often. Now, I have over 6,000 plants here by name, and I've only a fraction really, so think of the beauty in other gardens. I was interested in ericaceous plants, rhododendrons and all things like this, like these two here. These have been here some 23, 24 years now. There's quite a lot of rhododendrons in here, but the best rhododendron of the whole lot is that one there, which is Eucusimanum. I would be very happy if I only had that one variety in the garden. I haven't spent a lot of money on it at all. I'm interested in the plants that a lot of other people are interested in, and I can propagate these and get enough to swap for other plants that I want.
Now then,
Morning, Raymond. What you got there?
Echinopsis punicea. Don't last too long, but the buds come up following one another up. And make a
They'll
nice-
come here and they'll usually find something they like.
Unfortunately,
More
they
often than I'd find in their garden actually, but I can usually get what I want. This little plant here is one I call my blackmail plant, Daphne grandiflora. I call it that because it's a means and ways of obtaining plants that I want, and I can propagate this and do exchanges with my friends. I'm going to graft a Daphne grandiflora onto this Daphne mesoreum. You must be very, very careful with the razor blade. It is a must that you use this. A knife would be too stiff, and you've got to use an open-ended blade, and you must be careful of your fingers. Get a piece of string, nylon, put it over the top like that. Get a suitable cutting off the plant, like that. Just make the little point like that. Put it into the slot in the Daphne mesoreum like that. Slide the string up and pull tight. Cut off the surplus for the time being and recover with grip. And I'll place it under a plastic bottle where it can stop for approximately 12 weeks, but it needs to be looked at every so often to avoid drying out. But that's me, I like plants, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of that side of it. I can sum up what I think about gardening in 2 words, and that's peace and tranquility.
Now, you may remember that last week I was in the Lake District where I discovered that gardeners are largely responsible for the destruction of their beautiful limestone pavements. Now, I think that most gardeners will be horrified to know this, so for the past few months I've been experimenting with artificial rock. Now, anyone who's got a garden can make the moulds for these rocks, but unless you've got acres of space, you're going to have to do it in several shifts. The rock that you would otherwise buy is going to come in various different shapes and sizes, and it'll be all sort of knobbly as well, so you don't have to be too accurate. Now, it's made with a homemade concrete called hypertufa, which consists of 2 parts of coir, 2 parts of sharp sand, 1 part of fresh cement and concrete colourant, and that's all mixed together with water, and the rest is easy. Start with a little bit of water in the mixer, and then put in a bucket full of sharp sand, then a bucket of coir, and then the bucket of cement. And now's the time to add the concrete colourant, followed by the rest of the coir and the sand. Now, if you just stick this concrete into the hole, When you dig it out, it'll look like a bit of concrete you've dug out of the ground, and of course that's the last thing you want. So the first job is to line the hole with a bit of strong polythene. And don't worry about getting lots of creases in it. In fact, really, the more creases there are, the better, because it's those that make the cracks and the crevices in the rock. And then you can fill up with the hypertufa. Now, the next job is to work it up the sides so that you actually make a hollow rock. And of course, this saves on two things. It saves the weight of the rock, and it saves quite a lot on the cost of it too. And then what I do is just pat it down there like that with my hand. Make sure you've got a reasonable thickness on the sides. That's, I suppose, something like 2 inches thick all the way round. Tap that in, and that's fine. Now, this is a very straightforward way of doing it. But if you're doing very big rocks or thin, shallow, flat rocks, then you need to reinforce them. Just put about half as much in as you need. Spread it out a bit. And then get a bit of wire netting and just put that over the top. You'll have to bend it here and there to make it fit. And press that well in. And then a little bit more hypertufa over the top. And then just smooth it down. Now that will stay there for about a couple of days. And I've got one over the back here that, as they say, I prepared earlier. Now, because the hypertufa is dry but not hard, you have to be very careful about how you take it out. But just carefully lift it and tip it over. Now you can see the lovely little cracks and crevices here, but you can also see that on the top it goes quite shiny, and that's due to the polythene. So what I like to do at this stage is just to scrape it over the top. Now, because the coir is so light and the rocks are quite hollow, they really are quite light. So they're quite easy to handle, and they do have one other great advantage. I've used a similar sort of material in the past for making alpine troughs, and I found that after a couple of years they grow all sorts of lichens and mosses on them, and they really do weather down very nicely. One of the great things about shows like Chelsea, and all the others come to that, is that they give you a chance to pick the brains of the experts. Well, last week, Vanessa Collingridge went one better, and she visited Lancashire to meet an expert who exhibits at gardening shows almost every week.
Orchid enthusiast Mike O'Connell didn't exhibit at Chelsea this year, but as a former bronze medalist, he's got more than enough to keep him busy, competing at more than 40 other shows each year.
But what's the attraction that first got you into it?
I just went along to an orchid show and I saw all these diverse colours, the range of plants, and just decided that, you know, it was for me really, and sent away for 6 fragrant orchids. Grew them on the windowsill at home, and they did quite well. Then I built an Edwardian case, and they did quite well in there, because I only lived in a flat then. And then when I moved into a house, I built a greenhouse, and that's when it got serious. It became an obsession then, really.
Mike's obsession has grown into a collection of over 4,000 orchids from all over the world. It's this tremendous variety which provides a succession of plants in flower throughout the year.
I was always keen on plants, but orchids just had something different. You know, there was so many. You know, there's about 35,000 species of orchids, and I don't know how many hybrids. You know, it's just incredible, really. With every colour range, from white, red, yellow, greens, oranges, multiples of all those colours, and there's even nearly virtually a black one.
You've got some growing in pots and some growing in baskets. Why is that?
Well, there are three basic types of orchids. There are lithiophytes, which would attack, the roots would attach themselves to the crevices in rocks. There are epiphytes, where the roots would attach themselves on trees, and the roots would go down the trees and sometimes even into marshes. And then there are terrestrials, which obviously grow in the ground, which we're more used to seeing in this country. This is a very good example of an epiphyte. It's a dendrobium, what they call a Yamamoto dendrobium. And this has been in flower now for 3 months. This is virtually at the end of it, and these are the last few flowers that this will produce this year. And there's new growth coming from the base, which will produce the flowers for next year. As you can see, the roots just don't like going into the pot. They come down the side. So now I shan't put any more compost in there. I'll hang it up in the greenhouse, let the roots take the moisture out of the atmosphere, and you can see the lovely green velamen on the tips of those roots.
So what made you build a greenhouse specifically for the orchids?
To try and create the right kind of environment for them. A lot of the aluminium type greenhouses, you wouldn't get the humidity, and you certainly wouldn't get the height.
You've got it quite densely planted. Is that again for the humidity?
Partly for the humidity, and partly because I've got so many plants.
And you're trying to recreate your own equatorial environment in here?
That's right, it's my own little rainforest, shall I say.
Now, obviously you wouldn't have these out in full sun, so thanks for getting them out for us.
You're welcome.
Tell me about this one here.
This is an Ascocenda cross, which comes from Thailand. It would be bred there, and most people would have these growing outside the kitchen windows in Thailand. This is this plant's third flowering since November. There's November's flower spike, there was January's flower spike, and here we are in May, and it's flowering again.
And the roots will just continue to move their way up the plant?
That's right, the roots will just continue to move up. As you can see, the roots are branching, so it's quite happy, taking all its nitrogen in, all its feed in, just from the roots.
But is it possible to grow orchids without a special greenhouse?
Yeah, indoors, yeah, you can, providing you give them a little bit more care than what you would in a greenhouse, because they don't like direct sunlight, so behind a net curtain is quite adequate for a lot of orchids. You have to use just an atomizer, 2 or 3 times a day.
So ideal for the bathroom then?
Ideal for the bathroom, yeah.
You know, an orchid grower once told me that the secret of success was to drill a hole in the bottom of the watering can to prevent overwatering. Now, my little deep beds here have been producing very well. And indeed, I've been taking these lettuces off these 2 rows for quite some time now. And these last 2 will just do for my supper tonight, I think. But of course, it's essential, if you're going to provide a continuity in a small space, to replace that crop just as soon as the land becomes available. So just revitalise it with a bit of organic fertiliser, and then there's no need to actually dig it. All you need to do is just to cultivate the top couple of inches with a hand hoe, and you're ready for planting out again. Well, I've been growing these little round carrots in a corner of the patio, and they can now be planted out, and that'll give me a good head start. Now, these clumps can go in at about 6 inches apart, and they'll produce a good crop. Of course, the main thing I'm thinking about at the moment is planting the tender vegetables, and most of those will go into the allotment. Mind you, the summer's been a bit of a long time making up its mind this year, so if you live in a colder area, you might well feel like leaving it for still another week. My runner bean canes are already up, and they're spaced at 30 centimetres in the row and 60 centimetres between the rows. That's, of course, 1 foot by 2 foot. And just note that down the middle of the row, I've put a piece of black polythene. That could save hours of quite awkward weeding. And you can also see that I've put a few sweet peas down along the row too, just really to cheer me up and to attract a few beneficial insects. If you're planting in the borders, then you do very much the same sort of thing, but you will grow the beans up a wigwam there and of course plant some flowers around them. French beans can go in this part of the country now, but they must have warm soil. So if you're in a colder area, you're better off to leave them for a couple of weeks. And they're planted 45 centimetres, that's 18 inches apart. Courgettes are a little bit further apart at 60 centimetres, that's 2 feet. And if you haven't bought plants, then you can still sow them actually and still get a good crop. Just take a couple of seeds and put them in around about 2 inches deep, I suppose, and then just cover them up with a jam jar. And as soon as the leaves of the seedlings touch the side of the jam jar, take it off, remove the weakest seedling, and they'll give you a good crop, albeit just a little bit later. Now, there are a few good varieties of bush cucumbers around these days, but they're still not quite as heavy cropping as the trailing varieties. But of course the trailers do take up quite a bit of room. So if you're short of space, plant them up against a wigwam like this. Make sure that you tie them in regularly and of course support the fruit carefully. And of course with all of these things you must be sure to water them well before planting and afterwards too.